Hey, all, welcome to the Common Good Podcast. Happy Monday.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, right on. Dr. Terry Webb, so good to have you with us today. And all of those of you watching, glad to have you. If you as a watcher are a little confused about why on a Monday it's a conversation with me, Doug Pagitt, and Dr. Terry Webb instead of the Red Hat, Blue Hat edition, it's because this was a day that worked out for Terry and I to talk. So that's why we're doing this. And we're going to talk on a very similar topic and subject that we often do on Mondays around here on the Common Good Podcast. And that is, what's the effect of Donald Trump in our politics, in our life, but more importantly in this conversation about our own faith, because there's a lot of people for whom their faith has caused them to vote for Trump. That confuses me when I hear that from people. And a lot of people for whom that is their faith is walking them away from the support they have, not only of the 4-time indicted, 2-time impeached, failed presidential candidate. But there's a lot of people who are nervous about all Republicans altogether. So it's just caused a lot. And so anybody who has thoughtful contributions on this, as Dr. Terry Webb does, we love talking about. So, Terry, good to see you. I'm in Minneapolis. It's raining. It's been raining for a couple of days. I mean, I'm not ready to build an ark yet, but it's been a rainy...
It's been raining here for 2 days. It's suddenly clearing up, but we got a little bit of the taste of the latest hurricane hitting us. So,
okay.
But we needed the rain. So that's good news.
And tell the good people where your here is. Where are you?
I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I've lived here for quite a while, and I am an author. Have a website called Mary Theresa Webb.com. And I just finished revising a book that I wrote in 2019, which was Following Jesus in the Age of Trump. And if you put the book up, then we can talk about it. As you notice on the cover, what I'm concerned about as a Christian is the fact that we are so confused about who Jesus was and what he taught, how he lived, how he expects us to live. So you'll notice on the cover, we have somebody trying to decide which path to take. And unfortunately, those who follow, Trump, which I call Trumpism, or those who have been hypnotized by Trump, many of them have followed this, what we call Christian nationalism, which you've talked about a lot. I think it's of great danger because our founding fathers did not intend us to be a Christian nation, and those who believe in Christian nationalism, it's really not it's in very many different forms. But
Sure
instead of following Jesus, they follow Trump, and they kind of twist the truth about Jesus. So in my book, I have a whole section on the Beatitudes and some of Jesus' parables and his teachings and what he taught about what it means to follow Jesus, which is not what this current brand of what I call American Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism has been around for a long time, since the founding of this country. In fact, Christian nationalism is what happened in England and why many of the pilgrims came over here. And Christian nationalism is part of what's happening under Putin's Russia. And whenever time you have a mixture of a national interest and kind of confusing your following you're following Jesus to be really a patriot, and a patriot, and that's what's happening in this country. So it's
sure is. Well,
it's scary. It's scary. It's really frightening.
Yeah, and Terry, and your contribution to this is so helpful. We need all the voices chiming in, right, to help us think about this. In the title of this live stream and podcast, I asked the question: can you follow Jesus and follow Trump? And Sue in the comments from Facebook just says no, right? She just flat out with a solid no, and then followed by Fred on Facebook who says no, you just simply can't. Now, there's a lot of people who say, oh, absolutely. In fact, I have been in meetings. I have friends who say, not only can you should. So this then raises this question that is raised in a lot of religious circles. And that is, can any of us have a firm response to any question that has a, can you do blank and be a follower of Jesus? Or can you do X and be a Christian, right? It's a real question, because I've been around a lot of fundamentalist Christians that have a whole list of things you can't do. You know, famously, I don't know if anybody's even said this, but you can't sing, you can't dance, you can't smoke, you can't go with those who do it. Like, just all kinds of stuff that you can't do if you're a real Christian. And so, as somebody who's really been trying to warn people, you and I both, about the threats of Donald Trump on our society, on our culture, on our politics, certainly on our faith, for those of us that hold to a Christian faith, I don't know. I get nervous anytime any of us are like, you can't do this and be a Christian, because I just know enough Christians, man. There's just one of every swipe. How do you think about that question? Now, I know you didn't pose that question. I posed that question to just lead into our conversation. But can you just talk a bit about how you think about it?
Well, first of all, some of my background, you need to know my background. I am an evangelical Christian. I attended an evangelical seminary, graduated from a seminary, and I attend various different denominations. I have been in Mennonite churches and Lutheran churches and fundamentalist churches and no affiliation churches.
You religiously get around, don't you?
Yeah. And which I believe Jesus does too. So anyway, when I first got concerned, it was about 2019 when I wrote this book. Mm-hmm. And I was really concerned about all those people I were talking to who were voting for Trump, and said that if you're not a Christian, if you're a Christian, you need to vote for Trump. Mm-hmm. So I got very concerned, and I began to dialogue with people, because I wanted to know how they thought and why they thought that way. And I think what's happened is, and so I have at the beginning of my book, I have a dialogue with Christians, a dialogue which I enter into with anyone who has been a follower of Trump. And I end with a dialogue at the end as well, because this book is intended, and I'm hoping that if you buy one book, you get one free, and then the free one you can give to one of those Christians who's a follower of Trump, and begin the dialogue yourself. It's very difficult to dialogue. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they don't want to talk. They don't want to talk about it. Sometimes they will write something. I said, well, just write your thoughts so that I can know how you're thinking. So that's how it all started. And what I'm afraid of now is that there is such a cult and such an unrealistic believing every single lie that Trump says, that it's very dangerous. And if you look at the headlines today, there are more people voting for Trump, even though he's how many times indicted, and
4.
97
91 indictments,
91 counts against him. And
he's a real overachiever, that guy, both in his lawlessness and his
what happened if you follow this has been brewing for a long time. It's not just Trump. Right. Trump just kind of caught on to a whole movement that was happening. And it was a movement that was really a cultural movement or a political movement, in saying that we need to make our government a Christian government again, and that it was formed as a Christian nation, and we need to bring it back to being a Christian nation. People like the family, there were a lot of different roots of this that have been germinating for quite a while. And Trump came along, and they had prayer meetings in the White House, and Trump is not really, doesn't function. I mean, I can't judge anybody else's Christianity, but I have a section in my book in which I say, well, what does Jesus say about lying? What does Jesus say about your allegiance? And I change the kingdom of heaven to to the domain of God, because
Hmm.
we are a country that doesn't have
Yeah,
kings.
right.
So I changed the kingdom of God to the domain of God, and I looked at the domain of God during the Roman Empire, and exactly, what Jesus was born into, and what did he say about following the political leaders of his day.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then I took a look at, and then I have a whole chapter on Nazi Germany, which many of us believe that what we're headed towards is exactly what happened under Hitler.
Yeah, there's a
So
lot. There's too many similarities to feel comfortable, isn't there, with the way
there's a lot
churches
of
and religious
similarities
people
in
and
either Hitler or Mussolini. So so we are in a very dangerous time, and we need to, as Christians, try our best to reach out to those who mix up their faith with following Jesus with following Trump. They just don't go together.
yeah, yeah. Look, and I certainly believe that for me. I've never met anyone that I'm like. I think if you really look at what the call of Jesus would be up to, I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, talking about it, writing books about it. So I'm overly opinionated. And if you think a lot about what Donald Trump is up to, not only in his personality, not only in his behavior, but what he's actually pushing for as a candidate, his policies, I think it's hard to reconcile those. I would say, though, and I want to suggest that people try this one on for a bit, that we're better off saying your Jesus following would be more enlivening, would be more rich, would be better for you if you looked at Donald Trump and Trumpism and Christian nationalism more critically and seriously than the blind followership which you're doing. But
Yeah,
you can follow Jesus and be wrong about a whole lot of things. In
right,
fact, I'm
right,
so confident in Jesus following, you can follow Jesus and be wrong about pretty much everything.
right.
It's not, but I think what people get to, and a bunch of people in here, Shirley's just popped in now with a good solid no. Look, I understand the no that people have to this question: can you follow Jesus and follow Trump, with a solid no? I think what most people mean, and I believe that what we would all do better at, and I think you do this well in the book, is to get to the point where we say to people, what if you thought about it like this?
Right.
What if your faith compelled you to these commitments? So that basically what you're doing is not challenging someone's profession of faith or their desire to be a person who lives and believes and acts in the way that would be consistent with Jesus and Jesus' teaching, or a Christian, or however, whatever language somebody wants to use around that. But to say, I think there's a more perfect way, to borrow a Bible phrase. I think there's a better way, or as my 4-year-old grandson says, a more betterer way. I think there's just other
Yeah,
ways you could do this so that the door always stays open. Because I've heard from people in politics a lot that there's no way you can be a Christian and vote for Joe Biden. There's no way you can be a Christian and vote for a Democrat. And you're just like, come on, man. That's just, of course you can. So when we sometimes get a little bit like, oh, let's just invert that and say there's no way you could be a Christian who follows Trump, I think we're better off saying, I think this is what most people mean. I'm pretty sure the people even in the comments have meant this.
yeah. I say
Not
that in
if you take all this seriously. Go ahead.
I say that in my book, in the dialogue. I listen to what they have to say, and then I respond and say, well, I believe this way. And I go back to scriptures, and I do refer to scriptures a lot in my book. Just, if you follow him, read this passage. If you
Yeah.
follow him, read this passage or that passage. So I'm trying to go back to actually Jesus's day, what he said at that particular time in
Mm-hmm.
history, how he dealt with questions. Well, we need to pay taxes to Rome, and how
Mm-hmm.
he addressed
Mm-hmm.
some of the
Mm-hmm.
issues that came to him and that in that day. And the interesting thing is that some of his followers were zealots. They wanted to overthrow the country. And if you look at what's happening today, some of that is the people who are trying that came to the insurrection were trying to overthrow the government. So Jesus would embrace them,
Yeah.
and he would love them, and he would listen to them, and he wouldn't try to, to say, "Oh, you're all wrong." He would
Yeah.
just try to lead them in a different direction.
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's the magic.
and I think that's what we're challenged with, is to go back to the time of Jesus, to go back to what happens in other countries when you mix up with a authoritarian leader, which
Yeah.
Trump is, and he's got a lot of people behind him that are pushing some of the things that he does. He
Sure.
believes in himself, and I'm a mental health counselor. I have training as a mental health counselor, and there is a group of us that are very concerned about the fact that he is unfit because of his narcissism to be in a leadership position.
Yeah, well,
And
people who've worked with him said the same thing, including his chief of
and
staff
people
and
who
his
worked with him
military
say the
leaders. Yeah,
same thing.
yeah.
And
And
I
yet, 74 million people said yes to him again in new polling. A bunch of people who voted for him in the past are still going to hang in there. So the thing is, and Terry, I know you've been at this probably since 2015, like I have, tried to talk to people about this. In fact, I just stumbled on an old video that I posted on November 11th, 2016, with a
yeah.
thing like, here's 6 possible outcomes of the Trump administration. So this was, days after the election. And then at the end, I go on this whole thing about, hey, I'd forgotten I even recorded this video, that I'm going to pivot my life as a working pastor in a congregation at a time. I'm going to pivot my life so I can spend time engaging in helping faith voters see and understand what's going on. So I've been at this like as a professional obligation since 2016, traveled the country a bunch of times. And
Yeah, well,
yet people still, I mean, right there in Lancaster, we did an event on Christian nationalism right in Lancaster, Pennsylvania a year ago, and met people who are hardcore Trumpers, like everything you tell them. So it doesn't seem like what any of us are currently doing is carrying all that much persuasion to the masses. Now, as somebody who's into persuasion work, you never get tricked by moving the masses. You always keep your focus on moving the margins, right? 1%, 2%, 3%, just over time. Just, the way a river erodes a canyon, baby, you just keep flowing, Uh, so it's funny because we can quote Bible and we've been in Bible passage back and forth, probably both of us, with friends of ours that are like, yeah, but here's this passage and that tends to go, about that well.
yeah, well,
Uh,
I know, and what's happening in Lancaster, you probably need to know. We're the seat of Reawakening America tour. We're looking at all the different forms of what's happening today. And the latest one, and I have the name here, is called Gospel War.
mm,
Imagine that gospel war, and they take over. They attract these people, and they
yeah,
have these huge rallies. And fortunately, we have a press that is really trying to support those of us who are trying to counter this in our area. What I'm disappointed is that we can't get more clergy involved, like you. Uh, the new head of the seminary, the Lancaster Theological Seminary, has now been writing a number of articles, and I write letters to the editor
hmm
also. So we're trying to go through the press, as well as,
hmm
I'm hoping to say to people, well, buy a copy of my book, and then give another
sure,
copy to somebody and ask them to read it. Whether they'll read it or not, we don't know. And one bishop said to me, who was very supportive of when I first wrote the book, said, what do you hope to accomplish? I said, if we can just reach 1 or 2 people, we have made a difference.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think we have to set our sights lower than we originally thought. Well, we could just convince people, right?
Right. Well, and then here's the thing, like, because Donald Trump is running for the presidency of the United States, what matters is, to me, whether he becomes the president of the United States, right? A lot of
Right,
people want to be president. That doesn't bother me. A lot of people want certain people to be presidents. That doesn't
right.
bother me. Like, I'm not trying to run around and fix people's minds and what they think and believe and their desires. But the actual outcome of Donald Trump having the the levers of power as the president again after what he did the last time, totally nightmarish once again.
Oh,
So
I agree.
fundamentally, what this comes down to is how a subset of our culture behaves on election day. So when I'm like thinking about all the kind of work we want to do, I'm like, okay, realized I'm not going to get 30% of the American population, 25, 30% who support Donald Trump to just stop supporting him. They're not going to do that.
They're not going to
But
do
we
that.
can get 2 to 3 to 5 to 7% of certain kinds of voters, faith voters, in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, maybe Nevada, to stop voting for Donald Trump and therefore prevent him from having the reins of power that come with being the president. That's very doable, and that's actually accomplished by working the margins, because as you say it so well, Terry, a lot of people have an identity as a Christian, which has been melded with an identity of voting for Republicans.
Right.
And I often joke, it's like, you pull into the Wendy's drive-thru and you order a number 2 and it just comes with the fries. You can swap it out for the salad, but people don't know that. And a lot of people just made a commitment to following Jesus or were raised in a family that was Christian, and that just came with voting for Republicans. Then they're like, these fries are real soggy, but they're not getting rid of them. They're just not happy with them. And those are the people that we can try to move, right? The people for whom they feel like, I don't want my Republican identity and my Christian identity, especially evangelicals and white Catholics identity, to be so hardwired. I want to at least have some autonomy where I can choose one or the other. And then we're dealing with a different question, not just the question, do you support Trump and are you a follower of Jesus, but are you a follower of Jesus and are you going to vote on election day? And specifically, are you in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia,
Right.
these places. Right. So I know it's kind of a curious spot to be in, right? You're like, we can't work with everybody, can't stop. And who wants to run around trying to police the beliefs of everybody? I mean, anybody who's been in belief work are just like, that's exhausting. I can't police the beliefs in my own head. Like if you knew some of the thoughts going through my own head this morning, you would have said, hey buddy, you should figure out how to fix those bad beliefs in your own head,
We're all sinners anyway.
Right.
So, but I think you're right. What are the thoughts in our own head? Well, one of the interesting things is that I have spent many, many years as a missionary in many different countries. One of the things we lack is perspective. If you take a look at history, and we don't teach history very well in this country. If you take a look at history, you take a look at Constantine and the taking over of Christianity, and what happened, what happened with all of the wars and everything that resulted. And you take a look at why did the Pilgrims leave England in the first place? They left England because they didn't like what was happening with church and state. So the founding fathers decided they didn't want to form a Christian nation. In fact, our Constitution says that. So and then you take a look at what's happening in Russia currently, is that the patriarch of the, and I've done a lot of writing about this, what's happened with the patriarch is that he is in league with Putin. So because he's mad, because the Ukrainian church broke away from the Russian Orthodox Church. So you have all of those issues that happen when you meld church and state. What happens when you try to meld the two? And we've done that throughout our even our own country has had a lot of history of this. So we don't understand what really happens.
Yeah, and you're raising this important interlocking narrative, which is the Christian nationalism narrative. And for a lot of people, that feels like they're not even sure what it is.
Right.
We've spent a lot of time, I've been in front of a lot of groups talking about Christian nationalism, and I'll very often say things like—
And you have an excellent program for that,
Thank you. Appreciate that. We'll say, like, hey, how many of you think Christian nationalism is a bad thing, or you oppose Christian nationalism? And almost all the hands go up. And then I'll say, how many of you feel like you could define Christian nationalism for this group? And nearly all the hands go down, right? People are like, I don't like it. I know it's a problem, and I'm not totally sure what it is. And they're totally not sure why someone would believe it, and they don't know how it connects to people supporting Trump. So can I just give a little 4-sentence piece on this? Because I think it's really key for a lot of people who would be paying attention to this conversation.
Please.
Here's the new version of Christian nationalism. As Terry has said, Christian nationalism has been a constant conversation in Christianity since the time of Constantine. So if you don't know that long, rich history, it's there. And so there's been ebbs and flows of this, and lots of religious movements over Christians' history were responses to this. Calvinism is a response to it, and Lutheran tradition is a response to it, and all kinds of things, right? The melding of religion and government. But there's a new version of it, and it's the new version that's animating Trump supporters. And it goes a little something like this. It's the belief that God's desire for the world is for Christians of a certain kind to have control and influence in 7 areas of cultural impact.
Right.
It's called, they refer to it in their shorthand as the 7 mountains, the way that Moses goes up on a mountain.
Right. Or Dominionism.
Dominionism is the larger theological idea that God has dominion over all things, which a lot of Christians who sort of awaken to good, to goodness as their Christian spirituality are like, I like dominionism. I like the idea that God's godness is not limited just to church or just to my heart, but it cares about everything, right? It should care about our economics and our politics and our health and the environment. And it should just be like care about everything. So there's something okay in there, right? But then there's a version of dominionism which says God has dominion and reign and wants to raise up leaders to lead in each of those 7 areas. And things like the press, media, education, the military, politics, business.
Right.
So here's where this coincides with Trump, is that the people who are very often Trump supporters believe that Donald Trump was selected by God as a key leader from the area of media and business and now into politics. So he's a 3 for 1. Some people even throw in a 4 for 1, but he's like a significant leader. So what they say is he's not a choir boy. He's not a good guy necessarily. His past is checkered. And then they say, sort of on the side, but whose isn't, right? But he's been chosen by God to lead. So, like Cyrus. If you ever hear about any of these people using the concept of Cyrus, this is what they do. I was in a tent with a guy who's a major proponent of all of this, where he was doing a tent revival presentation in New York, and he said exactly what I'm saying right now. I'm almost quoting him verse for verse. He said, I was there when Donald Trump prayed. The anointing that fell on him by God also fell on me. I'm telling you, this man is chosen by God for this job. And he says, this Lance Warnow guy says, as a prophet in this world of that kind of thinking, and lots of people follow him, said, the question is not, is Donald Trump Christian? The question is he God's chosen man for the job?
Right.
Okay. Right. So a lot of people are like, look, sometimes God's going to use all kinds of instruments. I don't care what he did.
And look at David.
Look at David. Let's just go down the list, right? So this is why the Christian nationalism narrative, which says that God's ultimate goal is not only for America to be Christian, but for the whole world to be Christian through not only governments, but also media and business, and everything gets Christianized. And you have key leaders. That's why they pick Trump. So when any of us are like, he's been this many times divorced, he sleeps with porn stars, he lies and cheats, to these folks, they say things to me like, all the more the glory to God. Look at the kind of person God's willing to use. Look at how great God's grace is. So when someone then steps in and says, Trump is no good, you can't follow Jesus, these people are like, just the opposite. Right. If you don't see that he's God's chosen person for the job, you're the one who's blind. And then you're like, what is this, Freaky Friday, where like everything got turned on its head?
But
so that's why Christian nationalism ties in. Okay, sorry for the interruption.
No, that's all right. No, I agree with you 100%. But the part of that is so scary is that they can take over institutions, governmental institutions, by force if necessary. So it's that violence aspect, which is what's happened throughout history. If you look at the Roman Empire and the Crusades, look at the Crusades. So, that's the problem, is that Jesus was a pacifist. The early Christians were all pacifists. They didn't believe in war. They didn't even serve in the army. They refused to serve as Roman soldiers in any battle. So, if you really understand the history of Christianity, and I think that's part of the problem, it's not just the history of this country, but it's also the history of Christianity.
Boy, and that's so well said.
And you and I have a little bit of advantage because we've had seminary training and we've studied the history of Christianity.
Yeah.
But most Americans have not. In fact, if you talk to other Christians around the world, they will say, "Why on earth? What's happening in America? What is this kind of Christianity you talk about?" Even before we had Christian nationalism,
yeah,
it's kind of a brand of American belief system.
And it's the one being exported to other places, into African nations, especially into China, into Russia. This is the kind of thing that's been happening and going on for a very long time. But here's the curious thing, Terry. I'm interested in your take on this. Normally in this time slot, I do a conversation with a friend named Casey, and we call it Red Hat, Blue Hat Talk. We're both faith leaders, similar ages. We've been friends for 30 years. And he's a strong Trump supporter, and I'm not. So we talk about it. And if anybody's interested in that, you can watch the YouTube videos. We've got 5 of them so far. We're going to basically do this every week or every other week and sort of keep going and just listening to each other. And we really do love each other. Like, we're good friends. And the way he thinks about so many things in politics, but we share the love of lots of other things, music and all the rest. So we're trying to model this. Well, he's then led me into lots of other friendships and conversations. And somebody was messaging me the other day, and I was talking about the history of things. And here's where history gets funny. And this is what I want your take on. I was like, I don't think old George Washington, would have thought much of Donald Trump. And this person said, oh, Donald Trump is doing exactly what George Washington did, because the king also wanted to kill and hang and prosecute George Washington for crimes against the government. So he's recasted the Revolutionary War into Donald Trump terms, that Trump is taking on the corrupt state the way George Washington took on the English Empire. Then we had a little Bible interaction, and I said, so I guess you're going to say open all the doors, right, to prisons like jails. Are you going to join some of us progressives over here on the on the criminal justice reform? And then the person brought up Paul and Silas in jail and how they were wrongly arrested because of their faith, and then God opened the cell doors. So what happens with history is people start picking. This person picks Paul and Silas and says that's like the January 6th people, or that's like Donald Trump, or Donald Trump is like George Washington. I'm like, no, Donald Trump is like Benedict Arnold. Then we're having an argument about which historic character should we draw to make our historical comparison. And then you're like, here we go again. And this is what's amazing, right? Is you can't even just say, like, let's pick the Bible, because then they'll just assign King Cyrus or David or Paul and Silas to Donald Trump and insurrectiveness.
That's Old Testament too.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
Sure. Yeah. That's Old Testament. They go back to the Old Testament a lot, and they do consider Trump to be a messianic figure. And now he's taken his mugshot, and he says, "See, I'm doing this for you." So what did Jesus do? He died on the cross for us. So.
Wow. It's something else, right? Nothing is sacred. And all of the little tricks that any of us have had in our bag, like, let's use logic or reason, let's use facts, let's use the Bible, let's use history. We got this, right? Our Methodist friends are getting all encouraged, right? They're like, there's the quadrilateral. We're going to use scripture. We're going to use tradition. We're going to use reason, right? They're getting
tradition, right?
getting all excited. And then you talk to these folks and they use exactly the same things. They use Queen Esther and Cyrus and Paul and Silas and Peter wanting to chop off the ear of the Roman guards. Like they just.
But Jesus told him not to. Jesus put the ear back. I mean,
Yeah.
if you get into a conversation like this, I mean, you can go back to that same scripture passage and say, well, have you thought about this? So it's trying to, I think it's trying to broaden the vision, not just that you give them the Bible passages, but you try to broaden the vision. Is what did Jesus say about lying? Well, you can go back and read these passages. What did Jesus say about sexual infidelity? And it's there. It's just that they're looking a lot at the Old Testament. I think if you're taking the examples you've given me are part of the Old Testament.
Yeah, some of them are, but they're there with they're, as you said, they're correlating him with Jesus and the crucifixion. They're right there with Peter and
Jesus suffered for you, right? So I'm going to.
And they're using Paul and Silas, and so yeah, they're going to use the whole counsel of Scripture. They'll tell you, right? Like they're going to use all of it, and so what we find ourselves in then is a stalemate, right? As far as can you find history? Because people, I mean, Terry, it's just unbelievable the alternative reality in which people take these notions and spin them, right? And so rarely have I run across anyone who's been like, oh yeah, I think you're right, Trump's a liar, so therefore he's probably not God's chosen person. Because frankly, a lot of these people look at their own lives, and I've heard this from many people in these conversations, is basically things like, well, what you're saying about Donald Trump, if you're saying then he can't be Christian then I can't be Christian because you want to know my story. So what ultimately is happening when some of us are critiquing Trump is they're feeling personally attacked. Right? I was talking to a friend and I'm like, yeah, the guy's twice divorced. And he's like, well, I just got divorced a year ago. What are you saying about me? Right? So this is what happens when we start to say, Trump's not good enough to be your hero, your model, your savior, whatever. I think it's better off what you're doing in the book, which is to say, you don't need another Messiah. Like the whole point of Jesus is to be done with the Messiahs, right? Like that, the fulfillment narrative is like, we're done with that. We don't keep hunting for new versions. This isn't we're not doing sequels,
Right.
So we need a better story. And one of the things that I think your book really helps people in, because we often encourage people around here to ask 3 questions when they're engaged in conversations with people who think differently than you, especially on Trump, but really about anything. What do you believe? And actually listen so you know what they're saying. Try not to fill in the blanks before they say them. Ask them why they believe it and where it comes from. And that leads you to a lot. Sometimes you find out who.
And one of the questions and the dialogues that I've had, real dialogues, not just book dialogues, but the dialogues that I've had is they will ask me, well, what news do you read? Because, what news do you listen? Where do you get your news? And I said, well, I get my news for a variety of sources. I never ask them because usually it's only Fox News, unfortunately. And they'll say, well, where do you get your information? And I said, well, I go to scriptures. I also try to see what's happening in the world. I subscribe to The Economist. I try to listen to different points of view. In other words, and I joined Braver Angels for this because Braver Angels has this doing exactly what you're saying to do. What you're doing is very important. And that is you listen, you say, oh, that's very interesting. And I often say, and where did you get your information? And I never get an answer.
Yeah.
It shuts down the conversation.
Yeah. The what do you believe? Why do you believe it? Can sometimes feel like the end. But if you can get to the third question, which I think is the real gem, and that is, what does your belief do for you? How does your belief function in your life? As a counselor, this is where I learned this from some therapists that are like, we can talk about your beliefs, where they came from, and whether you're Freudian or not. We can come up with here's your belief, here's the root of it. That's not really the point. The point is, how is that belief functioning in your life? How is
Right.
it serving you? And this is where it gets interesting when you start talking to Trump supporters and Trump Jesus followers who are Trump followers. Like, what does it do for you to be a Trump follower? And then you hear things from them that are like, well, that's revealing. And frankly, sometimes it's not the stuff you'd expect. It's not always, I want only Christians or only white Christians or only rich people to be in charge of the
Mhm.
country. It's actually comes out of a real sense of insecurity and the
Yes.
feeling that Trump being president makes them feel more secure, makes them feel more safe. And we can critique why people feel the way they do all day long. I'm a professional at that inside my head, right? Real judgy up in here. But but if we set those judgments aside and realize, no, people are actually feeling things. And this following Trump is functioning in their life in a way that they believe is the current best option. And just like working with somebody who's addicted, if you work with anybody who has an addiction, you have to realize the the actions of their addiction feels like their current best choice,
That's
whether
right.
it's drugs or
Yeah, and
sex or
that's my
gambling or
background.
whatever.
I'm actually I have a doctorate in addiction intervention,
Yeah. So
and that's
pardon me
the
for
thing.
mansplaining to Dr.
No,
Webb about
no,
this,
no.
but this
You
is
know,
what I
I
think's most important, right? Then you say to them, can we offer you a better option to accomplish the thing that this belief is accomplishing for you? Rather than saying, you make no sense, you're ignorant, you don't know, you're a fool. You say, is there
that's
a
it.
better way for us, for you to accomplish what you want to accomplish with your belief?
Right.
Than your current belief. So go ahead. You're the pro on all this.
No, 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 I'm not the pro. I mean, I'm trying
Yeah.
to wrestle with this just like everybody else is, like you're wrestling. I think what you're doing is fantastic in terms of the dialogue. Um, I belong to or have belonged to a religious community in which the director did exactly what you're doing. He had breakfast or lunch with somebody who had completely opposite beliefs, and he said he spent most of his time just listening and just saying, well, what is that doing for you? It's very hard. You have to build a relationship, which is what you're doing. You have to build a relationship with people who are seeing, who completely opposite or are willing to do that. Now,
Mhm.
that's the question, is finding people who are willing to do that, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
And not getting frustrated during the process.
Yep.
And I think for us who are trying to do this, I try to do this through words, through my writing, but also and try to stop and listen to somebody. And if I hear something that I know that they're not going to be open to dialogue, then I stop right then and there. That's one of the things we learn in Braver Angels to do, is
Mhm.
you don't, when you get to a point, when you get a roadblock, you say, okay, well, let's talk about this another time, or let's talk
Yeah.
about something else. And
Yeah. And sometimes that more intense question of what does that belief do for you is the exit ramp, right?
yeah,
You don't have to argue about it. You can just say, and you have to have a more clever way than saying, well, how does that belief function for you? Because you say the line like that and people are like, okay, armchair therapist, like, I don't need you to be
right,
my
right.
therapist. You just find a way that's like, and so what does that mean to you? Like that kind of thing, or something around that. And I'll tell you, Terry, like a lot of people have thought the best way to practice this is with strangers over distance, like someone who you're different from enough that you feel a little separation. But most of us aren't worried about how do we learn to understand someone so different. Most of us are frustrated, and this is true in the chat that I'm looking at right now and all the social streams. People saying things like, my cousin, my friend, my parents, my kids. That's what gets people. Like, people are not befuddled by this question. Can you follow Jesus and follow Trump in this age? Because a bunch of strangers are doing it. Now, there's some people who are just I talk to politicos all the time and people in the political system that are like, I know no one who's a Jesus follower and follows Trump personally. Like, that's not my crowd. I don't know those people. Okay, so I just explain this as an anomaly of human character. But for people inside these relationships, man, we're all worried about our family and how to.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
like, how do I
Well,
talk to somebody in the
I have a
voting
family
line?
that
It's like, how do I talk to them on Saturday when they're in my backyard? Like,
right.
how do I do that?
I have a family that I can't talk to, family members that I can't talk to. So, then I know they don't wanna talk, so I can't go to first base, and so I try to say, "Well, if we can learn to talk to each other," but that takes a lot of courage. I wanna go back to something you said, and that was, the people are afraid, right?
Yeah.
They're afraid of what's happening all around them. They're afraid of nuclear, disaster. They're afraid of a lot of things. So they're afraid of change, and they're afraid they want to go back to the way it was. I think that the fear breeds hate. So the two together is what we're dealing with in many instances. That's
Yeah.
just my 2 cents.
Yeah, look, yeah, I think you're right on that. There's a lot of people for whom all the changes that have happened in America seem overwhelming to them, and they feel like it's not just change, they feel like it's a degradation,
Right.
right? They feel like it's gone backward. The way a lot of my friends feel like when they feel like, Roe versus Wade was overturned, they're like, "What are we doing? Going back to a terrible time?" It's a bunch of people that feel like things have just gotten worse, and they're
Yes.
really afraid for America. Like, I mean, truly, people I've talked to who support Trump and Jesus followers are so afraid of, like, the future of America because the Christian nationalism piece that you've articulated so well in the book is telling them that the very future of God's dream for the world is dependent on the United States, and that's dependent on the right leader being the leader of the United States. And if it's then not that right leader, then the agenda of God is not fulfilled in the world. And then we got real problems, right? So
Well,
this is where, to people's minds, they're just like, we're not talking about just moralism or that kind of thing. They just, to them, man, on the scales of balance here is everything that should matter to us. So politics be damned if we have to. We're going to get the leader that God wants in this country.
yeah, I know, and that's frightening. It really is. And there's a charisma. I mean, I don't want to go back to Trump because I do think we need to pray for him. That's very hard to do, by the way. But I do think he's captured. It's a cult. He's captured these people that believe in what you say, and they believe that he is God's solution to to America. And unfortunately, that's how dictators rise. That's what happened in to go. Oh, okay,
Yeah, Jim has to go to work. We have a bunch of regulars around here, and Jim's checking in that he
okay.
has to
But
go to work.
anyway,
Jim, we need to hear from you in the chat because I thought you were retired. Are you back to working, Jim? Anyway, little side note on the
okay.
internal
Uh,
conversation happening in the with the regulars in the chat.
but I think we need to continue the conversation, um, because I mean I'm just hoping to try to continue the conversation, and get people to look at what happens when you have a cult or when you have a Hitler-like figure
Hmm.
that then is charismatic, and what happens when they take over. And that's what we're faced with. If you look at what Trump wants to do, and these are a whole group of people behind him that are pushing for this.
Yeah,
But if you look at what he wants to do, it's going to destroy this country. It's going to destroy democracy. And I'm a Christian, but I'm also an American. Way back, my ancestors came over. One did the laundry for George Washington, and I know that they weren't
wow,
great people, but um, we have to look at exactly what the consequences will be.
yeah,
And one of the things we might say, well, what will happen if he gets, if Trump comes in as president? Well, first of all, he's going to lock out the country, and he's going to give Ukraine to Russia. That's already beginning to happen in some of the diehard Republicans in the legislature. So uh, I'm worried about the future of this
yeah.
country. But I'm also worried about the future of Christianity, because we're going to destroy Christianity in this country. And you have to look at, first of all, Christians are all over the world. I mean, they're very strong Christians in Uganda, and they've been misled on some the homosexuality issue. Though I tried to keep an open mind, she quickly threw back at me, "Your mind is so everything flies." So
Yeah, let me just read that for people that are on the podcast here.
no,
Sometimes I pop up these quotes from people that go along with what we're saying, and Alex has a comment from YouTube that says, "I tried to explain to my mom that I try to keep an open mind and dialogue, and she quickly threw back at me, 'Your mind is so open that everything flies out of it,' meaning my mind is empty." And she says, "Thanks, Mom." So, I mean, this is the kind of struggle that people are living with, right? Alex, an adult person like her mom, like, hey, you're you have an empty mind. You don't really understand the truth of what's going on. I mean, this is just this is at the heart of it, that we're looking at the same set
and
of
they will name call, and
circumstances.
one of the things we cannot do is name call, and that's one of the things we learned to do in Braver Angels is not to use stereotypes, name calling, and that kind of thing. It's just to be open to listen to people and reflectively say, "Oh, this is what you believe." So you're not trying to force feed them with what you believe, but you're trying to
Hmm.
get them to think. Um, and I'm not sure. We could go on this all day. Someone in my own church
And we
God
do on
is
this
punishing us.
podcast. We do that. We go on and on about this on this
But,
podcast.
Joe Biden, that's interesting about this, what's happening with Joe Biden. What bothers me, and if we're going to talk about Joe Biden, they want to impeach Joe Biden
Hmm.
because of his son's has had a very serious cocaine addiction issue, an alcohol issue. And I've tried to write letters to the editor about this. I said, give this guy a chance and don't blame his father. His father was trying to do what a lot of parents do, is they want to love him in spite of the fact that he has a terrible addiction and he's doing things as a result of that addiction. So um, this is what bothers me, is that they're attacking Joe Biden because his son has an addiction. We
Yeah.
can't. That's just, to me, is just, that's what really gets to me.
Yeah, yeah, and you bring up such a great point, because it's just it interlaces all of these issues about how we deal with our politics, how we treat our politics. And look, very few people, including professional politicians, feel good about our political system in the United States. It's weird how few people can actually run for public office. Our
Right.
choices seem so limited. It feels like that certain people carry power that we can't unravel. Like, it doesn't feel good. And so many Trump supporters that I know make the argument that the system is so broken, we need to dismantle it altogether, or burn it all down, any of that kind of language, right? And there's a lot of progressives who feel that way too. They actually share that view of the world. They just think the whole thing's got to get turned over. And so when Trump starts doing things the rest of us are like ruining democracy, they're like, no, this is what it takes. So again, they take the same facts and apply a different explanation to serve a different purpose.
Right.
And so rarely are we going to get to anybody. Like, look, there's no argument that most people watching this who agree with the premise of this conversation, there's no argument a Trump supporter's going to give to you that's going to get you to say, I think I should start supporting Donald Trump, right? So just like you're unmovable, they're going to be unmovable. But if you can make that person understand that your view is legitimate, that's better than them thinking it's illegitimate. And the beginning of that is to believe that their belief system is legitimate. You
And I
you
want to
can't get
encourage.
mutuality if you think the other person's belief system is fundamentally illegitimate. Like,
Well,
it's
I
ridden
want
in
to.
fear
Yeah,
or whatever. Yeah.
I want to encourage people that are on this call, because it's going to take all of us to stand up and speak the truth, no matter what happens. And that's what I'm hoping can happen. I mean, I had a grandfather who was a bishop, and he had to fight Henry Ford because he took the side of labor versus, so, versus,
This runs
versus
deep
Henry
in your
Ford.
blood. This
It's deep in
religious.
my blood.
Oh,
But I think I keep saying, where are those? We need more of us who will stand up, that we will listen respectfully, but we will say, but this is the truth. And I think that the truth is getting lost here. And that's what bothers me.
Well, the book is Following Jesus in the Age of Trumpism. Dr. Mary Theresa Webb, kind enough to let us call her Terry, Dr. Terry Webb here. So this is a book you can pick up if these conversations are interesting. Terry also has a Substack. So if you're a Substacker, you can.
Yes, I do have a
honestly, I
Substack.
tried to find your Substack and went into Substack and searched, and I can't figure it out. So
Okay.
there's something wrong with my fingers and brain.
Well,
But
you can also get on my website. I have a blog on my website as well. So
TerryWebb.com.
it's marytheresawebb.com, marytheresawebb.com. So so that's, you'll find out a little bit about who I am and some of my background. Anyway, thank you very much. And remember,
Thank you.
if you're interested, you can email me at terry@marytheresawebb.com. Just use the Terry that Doug is calling me and say terry@marytheresawebb.com. If you're interested at all in the fact that I want to get this out there, that you can give it to somebody you're having a dialogue with, and just take maybe we can talk about this. Maybe you don't want to read it, but maybe you can get something out of it. Okay. So if people read, oftentimes they'll just listen to whoever is telling them what they believe.
All of us. Yeah. There's a lot of words to read in this world.
Yeah.
Hey, last week we had a conversation with a person running for the Dauphin County Commissioner there in the Lancaster area, Justin Douglas. So we just did an interview with him last Tuesday on this podcast stream.
Well, Dauphin County is Harrisburg. Yes.
That's not your area. Doesn't include
No, it's
Lancaster.
Lancaster County and Dauphin County and Chester County and all the other counties that are around
Maybe
us.
he was just from Lancaster. I don't know. Somehow we were talking about Lancaster because he came up with the pronunciation. So.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so if anybody's in that part of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania is pretty important. And I won't even get into thinking about your senators. Your two senators causing all kinds of trouble over there. One is criminality and one with bad fashion sense.
Oh, yes, I know.
Oh, boy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Terry, thank you. And thanks to all the people. Tad, see your comment here. So Tad's new. Alexa. See, now things are going to start making noise because I mispronounced Alex's name. Kimberly, Yabbits, Vicky, Kristen. We just like to name the people who are good enough to comment. Peggy, Shan, Jim, Emily, Tegan, Sue, Susan, Christian, Dan, all of you, Adrian, Joellen, I got that name wrong. Vicky, all of you that are kind enough to be part of this. And if you're not seeing all these comments, you're like, why is he naming all these people? It's because we put this out on Facebook and on Twitch and on YouTube. So that's where they're all coming from. Our favorite place is YouTube. So if you're not on YouTube, any of you viewers and listeners, go over there and do the thing to help the algorithm, help other people find this, which means subscribe and like and that stuff. It's just all, doing your part to help the robots help us. So head on over there, and we'll be back tomorrow. It's Tuesday, so we'll be back with a politics day and back again on Wednesday. So full half week of content material. Terry, thank you again. Thanks for your friendship, being a part of this.
And if anybody is listening, again, my email is Terry, Terry, at marytheresawebb, THERESA.com. And I will be glad to answer any emails that come. I do have, and I'll give you the information about Substack as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, thank you all, and we'll talk to you all. I guess.